From refugee to Australia's most wanted, Kazem Hamad built a billion-dollar criminal empire from a penthouse in Dubai with ever setting foot in Australia. Over 125 firebombings, 2 dead, including 27-year-old Katie Tanji, killed in her sleep, a synagogue attacked in an act linked to Iranian state-sponsored terrorism. His weapon? Not drug cigarettes, with Australia's tobacco taxes pushing legal packs to $38. Hamad smuggled them for $1 and sold them for $11, the Kaz tax, forced shops to pay up to $8,000 monthly or burn. His 313 gang, over 100 members, run entirely through encrypted messages from the Middle East. On January 13, 2026, the puppet master was arrested in Iraq. Subscribe for more shocking true crime stories. This is his story. Who is Kaz Hamad? To understand Kaz Hamad, you have to rewind to the late 1990s. He arrived in Australia as a teenage refugee from Iraq with his family, chasing the promise of a better future. What unfolded instead was a crash course in Australia's criminal underworld. Hamad's early years followed a hard, familiar path. He was young, drifting between couches and the streets, battling drug addiction, moving through Melbourne's roughest suburbs. But there was something that set him apart from most kids stuck in that cycle. He wasn't just surviving, he was calculating, ambitious, ruthless. By 2019, Hamad had moved well beyond street-level dealing. He was convicted as part of a major drug trafficking operation involving heroin and other narcotics. The punishment was severe: 8 years inside a maximum security Victorian prison. For most, that would have been the end. For Hamad, it became an opportunity. Prison is where he made the connection that changed everything. Inside, he bonded with a senior outlaw motorcycle gang, someone with serious reach, deep contacts, and international pull. When Hamad was released and facing deportation in 2023, that relationship became his escape route. The offer was simple but powerful: a penthouse in Dubai and a doorway into a global criminal network worth billions. But Hamad had learned from experience. Drugs brought heat. Law enforcement chased narcotics relentlessly. 1 kilo of meth could mean decades behind bars. 1 kilo of illegal cigarettes. A fraction of the risk. He'd spotted the loophole, and it was far more profitable than drugs. The untouchable. Kingpin, building an empire from exile, when Hamad landed in Dubai in mid-2023. Australian authorities would later describe him as a puppet master. He was running operations from thousands of kilometers away, insulated from crime scenes, evidence, and direct exposure. It was a legal gray zone that made him incredibly hard to touch. Australia's tobacco taxes set the stage, with around 65% added through various levies. A legal pack of Marlboro Gold sells for about $38. The same pack, smuggled in illegally, could be sold for as little as $11 for someone smoking a pack a day. That gap translated into nearly $15,000 a year in savings. For Hamad, the profit margins were staggering. Cigarettes could be sourced from the UAE, China, and Southeast Asia for around $1 a packet. From there, they were funneled through Melbourne's ports that process more than 3.2 million shipping containers every year. While authorities can inspect only about 1% of them, once the product hit Australian soil, Hamad's real strategy came into play. He didn't just sell cigarettes, he took control. Through violence, intimidation, and carefully chosen alliances, he crushed competition. He introduced what became known on the street as the Kaz tax, forcing tobacco shops in his territory to pay monthly fees ranging from $3,000 to $8,000. Refusal wasn't an option. Shops that didn't pay were firebombed. Anyone who undercut his prices became a target. Anyone who tried to bypass his supply chain quickly learned why Hamad was feared as one of the most dangerous figures in the illicit tobacco world. By 2024 and 2025, Hamad had built something rare: a fully integrated criminal enterprise. Production overseas, smuggling through major ports, distribution handled by intimidated retailers, enforcement delivered through calculated violence, all directed remotely from the Middle East. The network, loosely known as the 313 Ganga name tied to a Shia Islamic symbol, expanded to more than 100 members. This wasn't limited to Melbourne. His brother Matham oversaw operations in Perth. His cousin, Ahmad al-Hamza, helped coordinate logistics. Street-level enforcement was managed by figures like Majid Alibadi, and through encrypted messages, trusted proxies, and loyal lieutenants, Kaz Hamad stayed firmly in control, far from Australian soil. The scale was extraordinary. While police focused on street dealers and low-level smugglers, Hamad was quietly assembling an empire. One criminology expert later compared it to Al Capone's operation during Prohibition only this time. The contraband wasn't alcohol, it was cigarettes, and the money flowed just as freely. When the shadows turn violent, the tobacco wars begin for years. The illicit tobacco trade barely registered as a real priority for Australian police. It was seen as almost harmless. Big tobacco companies losing profit didn't stir much sympathy, and billions in unpaid tax felt like an abstract problem, not a human one. Then March 2023 hit and everything changed. Behind the scenes, a small group of major crime figures had floated the idea of a commission. The plan was simple: regulate the illegal tobacco market, divide up territory, keep prices stable, and avoid bloodshed. Detective Inspector Graham Banks later revealed that fewer than 6 powerful players were involved in those talks. Hamad was one of them, and he refused. That single decision detonated the entire underworld economy around him. The moment Hamad said no, Melbourne's illicit tobacco scene collapsed into open warfare, one of the most violent gang conflicts Australia had seen in years. From March 2023 through to early 2026, more than 125 tobacco shops across Victoria were firebombed, with another 50 attacks spilling into other states. The violence didn't stay contained. It spread from convenience stores to restaurants, from shopping strips to private homes. At its peak, firebombings were happening multiple times a week. What began as a criminal turf war quickly turned. Deadly to people lost their lives, and one death, above all others, would come to define the investigation: Katie Tangi, the innocent victim. The death of Katie Tangi on January 9, 2025. 27-year-old Katie Tangi was house-sitting for her brother in Truganina in Melbourne's west. She was a performer, known for her kindness, creativity, and warmth. She had no connection to illegal tobacco, no link to organized crime, and no idea a war was unfolding around her just after 4 a.m. A firebomb was thrown through the window of the house while she slept inside. Police believe it was a tragic case of mistaken identity. The attackers were likely aiming for a rival address nearby. The fire took hold fast. Katie never made it out. Victoria Police announced a $500,000 reward for information leading to charges over her death. As the investigation deepened, intelligence began pointing back to Kazem as the man who directly ordered the attack, or as the architect of the violence that made such an act inevitable for investigators. And for the public, Katie Tangi's death changed everything. This was no longer criminals attacking criminals. An innocent woman had been killed in the crossfire of a war she never knew existed. The case weighed heavily on Detective Inspector Graham Banks and the officers of Task Force Lunar, the specialist unit formed by Victoria Police in October 2023 to confront the spiraling violence. A young woman was dead, and the man believed to be responsible was living comfortably in the Middle East, far beyond the reach of Australian law. That injustice would become the driving force behind what came next and ultimately the downfall of Kazem, a synagogue in flames. When the tobacco wars met geopolitics for most of 2024 and 2025. Investigators believed the tobacco wars were exactly what they looked like: criminal gangs battling for territory, money, and control. Brutal, yes. Violent, absolutely, but still criminal. Then December 2020 foreshadowed that assumption. On December 6th, the Adassah's Israel Synagogue in Repenlia, Melbourne, was firebombed. CCTV later showed 3 hooded men arriving in a stolen blue Volkswagen Golf. They carried red jerry cans and an axe. Fuel was poured across the building, the fire was lit, and they disappeared into the night. This wasn't just another arson. It was an attack on a synagogue, openly anti-Semitic act in a country that had largely avoided this kind of sectarian violence. Australian Federal Police Commissioner Chrissy Barrett initially described Hamad as a person of interest. At first, the attack seemed like it might still fit within the violent chaos of the tobacco wars. But as investigators followed the money, the case took a turn. No one expected ASIO, the nation's domestic intelligence agency, tracked the funding behind the attack. And the trail didn't stop with Hamad, it led to Tehran. In August 2025, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese made a stunning announcement. ACO had concluded that Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, had orchestrated the synagogue attack. They had also linked the IRGC to a separate attack on Lewis, Continental Kitchen in Sydney, in October 2024. According to intelligence findings, the Iranian regime had used local criminals to carry out the violence. Hamad's network was part of the machinery that made it possibly used as operational infrastructure. The people on the ground may not have even known they were acting on behalf of a foreign state. Overnight, the story changed. Hamad was no longer just a black market tobacco kingpin. He was now tied to state-sponsored terrorism, whether knowingly or not. He had become a tool of a hostile government attempting to destabilize Australia from within. Australia expelled Iran's ambassador and moved toward formally designating the IRGC as a terrorist organization. The fallout spread far beyond policing into diplomacy, intelligence, and regional security across the Indo-Pacific. The dragnet tightens, from Dubai to Iraq, by late 2024. Australian authorities were closing in. The AFP had spent months tracking Hamad's money flows, encrypted communications, and offshore operations. But one problem remained. Hamad wasn't in Australia. Worse still, Australia had no extradition treaty with Iraq, the country he had originally been deported to. So the AFP changed tactics. They began sharing intelligence directly with Iraqi authorities, and Iraq had its own reasons to listen. Hamad was also suspected of running drug smuggling operations inside Iraq itself. In October 2025, Australian federal police handed over detailed intelligence. It included Hamad's suspected location, the structure of his network, and the crimes he was allegedly directing from abroad. By January 2026, Iraqi authorities were ready. On January 13th, Iraq's Supreme Judicial Council announced the arrest of Kazem Malik, Hamad. The arrest was carried out at Australia's request. In coordination with Iraq's General Directorate of Narcotics and Psychotropic Substances Affairs, the official statement pulled no punches. Hamad was described as one of the most dangerous wanted men in the world, accused of importing vast quantities of drugs into Iraq and Australia, smuggling heroin, and working with major organized crime groups in Australia. The statement specifically cited alleged involvement in shootings, murders, kidnappings, violent assaults, extortion. Hamad was no longer just a black market tobacco kingpin. He was now tied to state-sponsored terrorism, whether knowingly or not. He had become a tool of a hostile government attempting to destabilize Australia from within. Australia expelled Iran's ambassador and moved toward formally designating the IRGC as a terrorist organization. The fallout spread far beyond policing into diplomacy, intelligence, and regional security across the Indo-Pacific. The dragnet tightens, from Dubai to Iraq, by late 2024. Australian authorities were closing in. The AFP had spent months tracking Hamad's money flows, encrypted communications, and offshore operations. But one problem remained. Hamad wasn't in Australia. Worse still, Australia had no extradition treaty with Iraq, the country he had originally been deported to. So the AFP changed tactics. They began sharing intelligence directly with Iraqi authorities, and Iraq had its own reasons to listen. Hamad was also suspected of running drug smuggling operations inside Iraq itself. In October 2025, Australian federal police handed over detailed intelligence. It included Hamad's suspected location, the structure of his network, and the crimes he was allegedly directing from abroad. By January 2026, Iraqi authorities were ready. On January 13th, Iraq's Supreme Judicial Council announced the arrest of Kazem Malik, Hamad. The arrest was carried out at Australia's request. In coordination with Iraq's General Directorate of Narcotics and Psychotropic Substances Affairs, the official statement pulled no punches. Hamad was described as one of the most dangerous wanted men in the world, accused of importing vast quantities of drugs into Iraq and Australia, smuggling heroin, and working with major organized crime groups in Australia. The statement specifically cited alleged involvement in shootings, murders, kidnappings, violent assaults, extortion, and large-scale drug imports particularly linked to Sydney-based networks. The following day, on January 14th, AFP Commissioner Chrissy Barrett addressed the media. She called the arrest a significant disruption to an alleged serious criminal and his alleged criminal enterprise in Australia. She also confirmed what many already knew: Hamad had been her personal #1 priority. After nearly 3 years of directing violence from the shadows, the puppet master was finally behind bars. The extradition nightmare, why Hamad's arrest doesn't guarantee justice, is where the story stops being simple. Kaha's arrest in Iraq doesn't automatically mean he'll ever stand in an Australian courtroom. In fact, it may do the opposite. Australia has no extradition treaty with Iraq. That single reality turns the case into a legal minefield, while the AFP can share intelligence and cooperate informally. Forcing Hamad's return would require delicate negotiations and reliance on broader international frameworks, none of them guaranteed. There's another, far more serious complication. Iraq still has the death penalty, and for drug trafficking, execution is a real possibility. Australia abolished capital punishment back in 1973, which places prosecutors in an ethical and legal bind. For some time now, extradition efforts have reportedly been blocked for one clear reason: Australian authorities do not want Hamad executed. They want him tried at home, where he could face decades in prison but not death. That leaves politicians in an impossible position. If Home Affairs Minister Tony Burke pushes hard for extradition and Hamad is executed, Australia becomes morally tied to a punishment it fundamentally rejects. If they don't push, one of the country's most dangerous criminals could remain in an Iraqi prison, potentially still directing operations from behind bars. Most legal experts agree on one likely outcome: Hamad will probably be prosecuted in Iraq first on local drug charges. Whether he is ever extradited to Australia remains an open question, and one that could take years to answer. Why Hamad's arrest might not end the war there. Another uncomfortable truth in all of this: Hamad's arrest may not actually end the violence. Former Australian federal police officer Rohan Pike, who specializes in tobacco trafficking, has warned that the opposite could happen. "We should not be under any illusions that this will conclude the problem," Pike said. And the reason comes down to structure. Kazem Hamad didn't run a one-man show. He built a network, a loose, cell-based organization with more than 100 members. His brother, Matham, was arrested in Perth in late 2025, allegedly caught with $1 million in luxury goods and accused of laundering money for the syndicate. Even that didn't shut things down. The operation adjusted and kept moving. Now, there's a power vacuum. And in organized crime, vacuums breed chaos. Rival groups, especially the Hedara family, who were pushed aside during the tobacco wars, may see this as their chance to reclaim lost ground. At the same time, younger and less disciplined figures within Hamad's own network could turn on each other, fighting for control. The very structure that kept the 313 gang flexible while Hamad was in exile now makes it dangerously unstable. Law enforcement is bracing for what comes next. Authorities expect organized crime violence in Australia to intensify through 2026 as these struggles unfold. In a bitter twist, the arrest of Kazem Hamad may not be the end of Melbourne's tobacco wars at all. It may be the first shot in an even darker chapter yet to come. The bigger picture: when prohibition creates Kingpin's criminology, expert James Martin from Deakin University summed it up bluntly. Kazem Hamad, he said, is essentially Australia's version of Al Capone. The comparison fits. During America's Prohibition era, from 1920 to 1933, the government banned alcohol and unintentionally created a massive black market. Figures like Capone didn't invent the demand, they stepped into a gap created by policy. The result was predictable. Organized crime flourished, and violence followed. Australia has created a modern version of that same dynamic through tobacco taxation. Over time, legal cigarettes have been priced so high that millions of smokers now turn to illegal alternatives. Illicit tobacco now makes up close to 29% of all tobacco consumed in the country. That's the space Hamad walked into. His rise exposes an uncomfortable reality. When government policy creates a lucrative black market, organized crime will fill it. And where organized crime